Hey guys, tonight we ease into the warm glow of a very different kind of myth. Imagine, if you will, gathering around a crackling fire, the only light chasing away the shadows, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stew. This isn't some grand temple or a windswept battlefield. This is the ancient Greek home, the heart of everything, and at its center sits a presence so fundamental, so quiet, you might almost overlook her. You're stepping back thousands of years, right into the very fabric of their daily lives, a place where the divine wasn't always thunderbolts and dramatic pronouncements, but sometimes, just a steady, comforting warmth. You probably won't survive this descent into domestic tranquility unscathed by the sheer lack of drama, but hey, we'll give it a shot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always wild to see how far these quiet journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're talking about Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, of home, of domesticity, of the family itself. She's the one you don't see throwing lightning bolts, the one whose name doesn't usually pop up in epic poems about heroes hacking monsters. And that, right there, is the core of our story tonight, why this crucial, foundational goddess seemed to glide through the tumultuous world of the Olympians without getting tangled in their endless, messy squabbles. You see, while her brothers and sisters were busy vying for power, cheating on each other, starting wars over golden apples, and generally behaving like a celestial reality show cast, Hestia cultivated a different kind of power. A quiet, enduring presence that was absolutely vital, yet somehow existed outside the main current of divine conflict. Think about the other major players on Olympus. You've got Zeus, king of the gods, perpetually involved in some scandalous affair or asserting his dominance. Hera, his long-suffering, and often vengeful, wife, constantly battling his infidelity. Poseidon, ruler of the seas, moody and prone to earthquakes. Hades, lord of the underworld, a bit of an outsider but definitely with his own dark domain. Even the younger generation, Apollo with his arts and light, Artemis with her wild hunt, Athena with her wisdom and warfare, Ares with his sheer brutality, Aphrodite with her irresistible, and often disruptive, beauty, Hermes with his trickster ways, Hephaestus with his forge and his limp. They all have their spheres, and those spheres inevitably collide, creating friction, rivalry, and outright war. Their myths are full of drama, passion, jealousy, and conflict. They are, in a word, loud. Hestia, on the other hand, is quiet. Her realm isn't the sky, the sea, the underworld, or the battlefield. It's the center of the house, the hearth. The place where the fire burns, where food is cooked, where the family gathers. It's the anchor of the home, the literal and symbolic heart. And this domain, this focus on the internal, the stable, the nurturing, fundamentally shaped her interaction, or lack thereof, with the external, chaotic world of Olympian politics. To understand why she avoided the squabbles, you first have to appreciate just how central the hearth was in ancient Greek life. It wasn't just a fireplace. It was the spiritual core of the home. Every meal was cooked there, yes, but it was also the place where newborns were introduced to the family, where suppliants sought refuge, a mainstream historical fact. Seeking refuge at the hearth was a recognized custom, protected by Hestia, and where offerings were made to the gods, often starting with a small offering to Hestia herself, as the guardian of this sacred space. It was the symbol of continuity, of warmth, of safety. A home without a hearth wasn't truly a home in the ancient Greek sense. It was this deep, fundamental connection to the very idea of home that grounded Hestia and set her apart. While other gods were associated with grand temples and public festivals, think of the massive temples to Zeus, Athena, or Apollo, Hestia's primary sanctuary was in every single Greek home. She was honored daily, in small ways, around the family hearth. This intimate, constant devotion, rather than grand, infrequent public spectacle, reflects her nature. She wasn't about dazzling displays of power, she was about steady, reliable presence. She was the divine embodiment of the domestic sphere, a realm that, while essential, often operates on a different plane than the cutthroat world of politics and power plays. Consider the quirky tidbit here. In some ancient Greek cities, there was a public hearth, often in the Prytaneon, the town hall, where a perpetual flame was kept burning in honor of Hestia. This public hearth was like the communal heart of the city, mirroring the role of the hearth in the individual home. When colonists set out to found a new city, they would often carry a flame from the mother city's public hearth to light the new settlement's own public hearth, symbolically carrying Hestia's presence and the connection to their roots with them. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? This quiet goddess, whose essence could be carried in a simple flame across the sea, linking communities not through conquest or political alliance, but through the shared warmth of home. Historians still argue whether Hestia was originally a pre-Greek deity absorbed into the Olympian pantheon or if she developed within the Greek mythological framework. Her unique position, her lack of a strong narrative mythology compared to others, and her fundamental connection to the very concept of hearth leads some scholars to believe she represents a very ancient layer of Greek religious thought, perhaps predating the more anthropomorphic, dramatic figures of the later Olympian myths. This scholarly debate highlights just how different she is. Her origins are as debated as her lack of drama is apparent. This inherent difference in domain and focus provides the first major clue to why Hestia largely remained aloof from the typical Olympian drama. Her power wasn't about conquest, persuasion, or manipulation of others. It was about presence, stability, and the nurturing core of existence. It's hard to start a fight when your primary concern is keeping the soup warm and the family together. While Ares thrives on conflict and Aphrodite stirs up trouble with desire, Hestia's very essence is peace and order within a defined, protected space. Her domain is the antithesis of the external chaos that fueled so many Olympian myths. She embodies the calm eye of the storm, the quiet center around which the world of the home revolved. And in a pantheon where power was often measured by how much you could shake things up, her strength lay in her steadfastness, her refusal to be moved. This foundational difference in her role, her focus, and her power set the stage for a divine life lived largely outside the spotlight of Olympian squabbles. So, you have this goddess whose very essence is rooted in the quiet, stable heart of the home, a stark contrast to the thunderous pronouncements and dramatic entrances of her siblings. But Hestia's unique position, her ability to float above the fray, isn't just about her chosen domain. It's woven into the very fabric of her existence, starting right at the very beginning of the Olympian saga, with a birth story that's, well, let's just say it wasn't your typical delivery room drama. It involved a very anxious father and a rather unpleasant digestive detour. You see, Hestia is one of the 6 original children of the Titans Cronus and Rhea. Cronus, the king of the Titans, had a rather severe case of daddy issues, stemming from how he had overthrown his own father, Uranus. A prophecy foretold that one of his children would do the same to him. Now, most parents might deal with this by, maybe sending the kids to military school or encouraging a less ambitious career path. But Cronus? Cronus decided on a more permanent solution. As each child was born to poor Rhea, he promptly swallowed them whole. Like some kind of terrible, mythological Pez dispenser. Gulp. First came Hestia. Born, presumably, into the world, only to be immediately consumed by her father. Gulp. Then came Demeter. Gulp. Hera. Gulp. Hades. Gulp. And Poseidon. Gulp. 5 children, all disappearing into the cavernous maw of their paranoid father. Imagine Rhea's despair, watching her babies vanish one by one. It's enough to make you want to switch from ambrosia to something a bit stronger. But Rhea, bless her heart, wasn't entirely passive. When her 6th child, Zeus, was born, she tricked Cronus by giving him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to swallow instead. Cronus, apparently not the sharpest tool in the divine shed, or perhaps just really hungry, fell for it. He swallowed the rock, none the wiser, while Rhea spirited baby Zeus away to Crete to be raised in secret. This act of deception, this moment of a mother protecting her child from a monstrous father, is a mainstream historical fact within the core Greek myths of the Titanomachy. It's the pivotal turning point that allows the next generation to challenge the old. Zeus grew up, eventually returning to confront his father. The stories vary slightly on the details, but the common thread is that Zeus, either through force or trickery, sometimes involving a potion given to Cronus by Metis, Zeus's first wife, who was also swallowed, but that's another story, caused Cronus to violently regurgitate the children he had swallowed. And here's where Hestia's unique position comes into play. She was the first child born, the first one swallowed. But when Cronus finally, dramatically, and probably quite messily, expelled his offspring, Hestia was the last one to emerge. Think about that for a second. First in, last out. This bizarre birth order, this involuntary journey into and out of her father's belly, sets her apart from all her siblings from the very beginning. While Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon were swallowed and then released in some middle order, Hestia experienced both extremes. She was the alpha and the omega of Cronus's terrible meal plan. It's a quirky tidbit of her mythology, this dual status as both the eldest and the youngest of the core Olympian siblings, though technically Zeus is the youngest born outside the belly. What does this mean symbolically? Why does it matter that she was first swallowed and last released? Well, historians still argue whether this unique sequence signifies anything specific about her nature or role. Some scholars suggest it links her to the beginning and end of things. The first offering in a sacrifice often went to Hestia, and sometimes the last too. It could symbolize her fundamental, foundational nature. The hearth is the first thing you establish in a home, and it's the last thing you abandon. It's the origin point and the constant. Her journey through Cronus could be seen as a kind of cosmic purification or tempering, a passage through darkness that brings her back to the light, but perhaps with a different perspective than her siblings who didn't experience both ends of the spectrum. This strange start to life, being the first victim of her father's paranoia and the last to be freed, could have instilled in her a deep-seated appreciation for stability and safety, the very things her domain represents. While her siblings emerged ready to fight, to carve out their spheres of influence in a world defined by conflict, Hestia's first major life event was one of passive endurance, followed by a liberation that placed her at the end of that initial generation's reemergence. It's like everyone else got off the cosmic bus at various stops, ready to hit the ground running, but Hestia waited until the very last stop, maybe took a moment to dust herself off, and thought, "Okay, well, that was unpleasant. I think I'll just focus on making sure nobody has to go through that again, at least not in my house." It's hard to get caught up in who gets the biggest piece of pie when you've recently been pie-filling yourself, you know? This unique origin story, being the first swallowed and last born, gives her a foundational identity that is distinct. She is the eldest, carrying the weight of that initial generation's trauma, but also the youngest in terms of her re-entry into the world, perhaps granting her a fresh perspective. It sets her apart from her siblings who were born and released in the middle, who might have been more immediately focused on establishing their power within the emerging Olympian order. Hestia's experience is one of being both the origin point, firstborn, and the culmination, last released, a divine embodiment of the cyclical nature of life, and perhaps, a divine being who saw the chaos inherent in her father's actions and her siblings' subsequent power struggles, and decided that a quiet, steadfast presence was a more powerful path. It's not just that her domain is peaceful. Her very beginning is marked by a unique, passive suffering and a symbolic rebirth that fundamentally differentiates her experience from the Olympians who would go on to define themselves through conflict and competition. So you're left with this image at the end of Section 2, Hestia, the first swallowed, waiting inside her father's gut while her siblings join her one by one, and then, when the great cosmic pukefest happens, she's the very last one to see the light of day again. Imagine the scene. Zeus, now a grown god, having tricked Cronus into swallowing that rock instead of him, returns. The specifics vary. Some myths say Zeus forced a special emetic potion down Cronus's throat, perhaps brewed by Metis, before Zeus swallowed her, because apparently, swallowing family members was a thing in this family. Others say Zeus cut him open. Let's go with the potion. It feels slightly less gory for bedtime. So, Cronus drinks this concoction, and his titanic stomach rebels in the most spectacular, world-altering way imaginable. Out they come, in reverse order of swallowing. First the stone, which Cronus probably thought was Zeus, bless his heart, then Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, and finally, with perhaps a dramatic flourish of cosmic indigestion, Hestia. Plup. Free. Imagine the sheer, overwhelming relief mixed with, what exactly? Confusion? Annoyance at having spent years, maybe decades or even centuries, in that dark, cramped, presumably smelly space? It's not exactly a spa retreat, is it? You'd think they'd all need some serious therapy after that, or at least a good bath. Okay, who wants to talk about their feelings first? No? Anyone? Right, let's just go fight Dad instead. Classic family dynamics. This escape, this violent expulsion from the belly of the beast, is a mainstream historical fact in the foundational myths of the Greek gods. It's the event that allows the Olympian generation to even exist outside of Cronus's digestive tract, and thus, to challenge him for control of the cosmos. Without this moment, there's no Titanomachy, no Mount Olympus as we know it, no Zeus as king. It's the great divine prison break. For Hestia, emerging last has a particular resonance. While her siblings tumbled out, ready to size each other up and figure out who was going to rule what, Hestia's experience was uniquely extended. She was the first to endure the confinement, and the last to be freed. This dual status, eldest and youngest in the context of this bizarre rebirth, is often cited as a key element of her dual nature, or her unique position. She has the perspective of the beginning, first swallowed, and the end, last released. She was the first victim of Cronus's paranoia and the final beneficiary of Zeus's liberation. What does this mean for a goddess? It could mean she carries the weight of that initial trauma more profoundly, fostering a deep need for security and stability. Or perhaps, emerging last, she saw the immediate jostling for position and power among her siblings and felt a fundamental disconnect from it. She had just escaped one form of confinement and chaos. Perhaps the idea of immediately diving into another, albeit external, conflict held little appeal. Her dual nature isn't about being two-faced or contradictory. It's about embodying two extremes of experience within that foundational event. She is the one who was deepest in, and the one who took the longest to get out. This could have given her a unique, perhaps even weary, perspective on the external struggle for dominance that was about to consume her family. Think about it. Her siblings emerge, blinking in the light, ready to take on the world, and their father. Hestia emerges last. Maybe she just wanted a quiet corner, a warm blanket, and maybe some antacid for everyone involved. This contrast in immediate post-regurgitation priorities could be seen as an early indicator of her later preference for the quiet, internal world of the hearth over the loud, external world of divine politics and war. She'd had enough, outside, for one lifetime, thank you very much. There's a quirky tidbit related to this event, the stone that Cronus swallowed, believing it to be Zeus. According to the ancient Greek traveler and writer Pausanias, a mainstream historical source, documenting what he saw and heard in the 2nd century AD, this stone, known as the omphalos, meaning navel, or center, was later set up at Delphi and was considered a sacred object, marking the center of the world. So, Cronus's mistaken meal became a cosmic landmark. It's a strange journey for a rock, from a titan's gut to the most important oracle site in Greece, and it serves as a physical reminder of this foundational myth. Historians still argue whether the omphalos stone at Delphi truly was the one from the Cronus myth, or if the story was attached to an existing sacred stone later, but the connection highlights the enduring significance of this event. This escape and rebirth define Hestia's initial position within the emerging Olympian family. She is the eldest sister, but effectively the youngest free sibling for a crucial period. This gives her a different seniority and a different perspective than, say, Zeus, who was never swallowed, or Hera, who was swallowed and freed somewhere in the middle. While Zeus was off being raised in secret, Hestia and her other siblings were having a shared, traumatic, internal experience. This shared trauma, followed by a staggered release, could have forged unique bonds or unique distances between them. Her dual nature, stemming from this event, is perhaps best understood as the interplay between her ancient, foundational status as the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, and her subsequent position as the last to re-enter the world and join the Olympian ranks. She is both the origin and the culmination of that specific, terrible beginning. This unique perspective, gained literally from the inside out, likely contributed to her later choices, her rejection of suitors, her focus on the hearth, and ultimately, her willingness to yield her seat on Olympus. She had already been through the ultimate upheaval. Perhaps the constant, petty squabbles of the free world seemed less compelling compared to the simple, enduring warmth of a fire. Her escape from Cronus wasn't just a physical liberation. It was perhaps the moment that set her on a path distinct from her power-hungry siblings, a path towards a different kind of strength found not in conquest, but in constancy. So, there you are, hypothetically speaking, watching this whole cosmic drama unfold. The first generation of Olympians has just been, shall we say, unburdened from their father's digestive system. They're free, blinking, maybe a little disoriented, but immediately, the stage is set for the next act. The Titanomachy, the great 10-year war between the newly freed Olympian gods, led by Zeus, and the old guard, the Titans, led by Cronus. This wasn't some minor skirmish over who got to use the celestial remote control. This was a full-blown, world-shaking conflict that determined the very structure of reality, as the ancient Greeks understood it. Mountains were thrown, seas boiled, the sky itself seemed to crack. It was the ultimate family feud, played out on a cosmic scale. After years of intense fighting, aided by allies like the Cyclopes, who forged Zeus's lightning bolts, Hades' helmet of invisibility, and Poseidon's trident, pretty sweet war gear, honestly, and the Centimanes, hundred-handed giants, excellent for throwing rocks, the Olympians finally triumphed. They defeated Cronus and most of the Titans, banishing them to the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. Victory! Freedom! A new era dawned, the age of the Olympians. And with this victory came the need to establish order, to figure out who ruled what, and to form the divine government that would oversee the cosmos from their shiny new home on Mount Olympus. This is where Hestia, fresh from her involuntary internal vacation, takes her place among the victorious gods. As one of the 6 original children of Cronus and Rhea, she was part of the core group that spearheaded the war effort, even if her role during the actual fighting isn't heavily detailed in myths. Perhaps she was busy setting up the first celestial aid station. Regardless of her battlefield contribution, her birthright made her a key figure. She was unequivocally one of the most senior deities in the new order, a sister to Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, and Demeter. So, she ascends to Mount Olympus with her siblings. Imagine the scene, the dust settling after the war, the Titans safely locked away, and this rather dysfunctional family standing on the highest peak, looking out at the world they've just won the right to rule. There's Zeus, flexing his newfound power and perhaps already eyeing potential divine affairs. There's Poseidon, probably already thinking about hitting the beach. There's Hades, likely looking a bit gloomy and wondering if his new underground property has good internet access. Hera and Demeter are there too, future queens and mothers, with their own powerful domains awaiting them. And then there's Hestia. While her brothers divvied up the major cosmic real estate, Zeus drew lots and got the sky and the rule over all gods and men, Poseidon got the sea and the watery realms, and Hades drew the short straw and got the gloomy underworld. Talk about a tough draw, right? Hestia didn't participate in this territorial squabble. This division of the cosmos by lot between the 3 brothers is a mainstream historical fact within Greek mythology, a foundational element explaining their respective domains. It highlights the immediate focus of the male gods on external spheres of power and influence. Hestia, however, had a different priority. She didn't vie for a piece of the sky, the sea, or the underworld. Her domain wasn't something to be claimed through conflict or chance. Instead, she focused on something quieter, more fundamental. She took her rightful place among the principal gods, the core of the Olympian pantheon, but her power wasn't about ruling a vast, external territory. It was about presence and principle. She was part of the council, the original group of powerful deities who would gather on Olympus to deliberate, and sometimes spectacularly disagree. The concept of the 12 Olympians as the ruling council is central to later Greek mythology, and Hestia was initially counted among them. These were the gods who held court, received prayers, and intervened, often dramatically, in human affairs. Hestia was there, a silent, steady presence amidst the burgeoning divine bureaucracy and the inevitable power plays. Her joining the Olympian pantheon wasn't marked by a dramatic power grab or a declaration of dominion over a specific physical realm in the same way her brothers claimed the sky, sea, and underworld. It was a natural assumption of her place as a senior goddess, a sister of the new king, a survivor of the old order, now part of the new. Historians still argue whether the idea of a fixed council of 12 Olympians was a consistent belief throughout all of ancient Greece or if it solidified later, with different city-states sometimes including or excluding minor deities. This debate is particularly relevant when we get to Hestia's later decision to yield her seat, suggesting the composition wasn't always entirely rigid. But in the early myths, Hestia is firmly established as one of the premier deities, part of that core group that made Olympus the center of the divine world. Her presence on Olympus was different from the start. While Zeus was busy consolidating power and planning his next conquest, or seduction, Poseidon was stirring up storms, and the others were finding their footing and their rivalries. Hestia was just being there. Her power wasn't expressed through thunderbolts, or tidal waves, or dramatic interventions in human lives. It was inherent in her status, her seniority, and her unique connection to the foundational concept of home. It's like everyone else showed up to the cosmic office ready to pitch their department's budget, and Hestia just quietly found the celestial break room and started making coffee, knowing that her job was essential, even if it wasn't the loudest. A quirky tidbit here, linking back to the Omphalos stone we mentioned earlier. After the Titanomachy, the stone Cronus swallowed was indeed set up at Delphi, becoming a symbol of the world's center. It's almost as if the universe itself needed a physical marker to say, "Okay, that era of being swallowed by your dad is over, this is the new normal." And Hestia, having been the last one out, the one who perhaps saw that end more clearly than others, was perfectly positioned to embody the stability that the new order desperately needed after such chaos. Her joining the pantheon wasn't about adding more drama. It was about bringing a necessary counterpoint to the inherent instability of her ambitious siblings. She didn't need to claim an external territory because her domain was already everywhere, in the heart of every home, a constant reminder of the peace and security that the new Olympian rules should ideally provide, even if the gods themselves often failed to embody it. Her inclusion among the ruling gods solidifies her importance, even as her role diverges from the typical divine power players. She's not just some minor goddess hanging around, she's a sister of Zeus, one of the original six. Her presence on Olympus is less about wielding overt power and more about representing a fundamental aspect of existence that is crucial to both gods and humans, the stability and sanctity of home. While her siblings were figuring out how to rule the world, Hestia was already embodying the quiet strength of the place where the world begins, the hearth. And this early difference in focus, this immediate inclination towards the internal and the stable rather than the external and the competitive, is a key factor in understanding why she would later choose a path that led her away from the very squabbles she was technically part of the council designed to manage. She was on Olympus, yes, but her heart and her power were already centered somewhere else entirely. So, you've got Hestia, one of the original Big Six, sister to the new king of the gods, with a unique perspective gained from being swallowed first and released last. She's on Mount Olympus, technically part of the ruling council, present for the divine debates and decisions. But as we touched on, her focus wasn't on carving out a piece of the external world, the sky, the sea, the underworld, to rule. While Zeus was getting comfortable on his throne and Poseidon was figuring out how to make the biggest waves, Hestia quietly claimed her sacred realm, the hearth and home. This wasn't a territory won in war or claimed by lot. It was a domain she embodied, a principle she represented, and it was absolutely vital, the grounding force in a chaotic world. Imagine ancient Greek life again. Forget the temples, the agoras, the battlefields for a moment. Go back inside the simple, often crowded, house. At the center of that house, literally and figuratively, was the hearth. It was a stone or clay structure, sometimes just a pit in the floor, where the fire burned. This fire was the lifeblood of the home. It provided warmth in the winter, light in the darkness, and most importantly, it was where the food was cooked. Without the hearth fire, a family couldn't eat, couldn't stay warm, couldn't see after dark. It was the essential engine of domestic survival. But the hearth was far more than just a functional fireplace. It was the symbolic heart of the family, the religious center of the home. This is a mainstream historical fact. The oikos, the ancient Greek household, was a fundamental unit of society, and the hearth was its sacred core. Every meal shared around the hearth was a kind of communion, reinforcing family bonds. Important family rituals happened there. When a child was born, they were often carried around the hearth in a ceremony called the amphidromia, formally introducing them to the family and the household gods, with Hestia foremost among them. When someone died, the hearth fire might be temporarily extinguished as a sign of mourning, only to be relit from a neighbor's hearth or a public fire, symbolizing the continuity of life even through loss. It was the site of daily prayers and offerings. Before beginning a meal, a small portion of food or a libation, a pouring of liquid, like wine or oil, would often be offered to Hestia at the hearth, a simple, quiet act of reverence that acknowledged her constant presence and protection. This focus on the home, on the internal space of the family, is what made Hestia's domain so different from her siblings. Zeus ruled the vast sky, an external, public, and often volatile realm. Poseidon commanded the unpredictable seas. Hades presided over the shadowy underworld, a place of the dead, outside the world of the living. Hera was the goddess of marriage and childbirth, yes, but her myths often involve her external struggles with Zeus's infidelity, and her public displays of wrath. Demeter was tied to the external world of agriculture, the fields, the changing seasons. The younger gods, like Ares and Athena, were associated with warfare, a very external activity. Apollo with the arts and healing, often performed in public spaces, Artemis with the wild hunt, the world outside the city. Their domains were vast, open, and often arenas for conflict and dramatic interaction. Hestia's realm, in contrast, was enclosed, intimate, and fundamentally stable. The home was a sanctuary from the outside world, a place of safety and order. And Hestia was the divine presence that guaranteed that safety and order. Her power wasn't about expanding influence or conquering territory. It was about maintaining the existing structure, the warmth, the peace within the walls of the home. It was a grounding power, anchoring the family and, by extension, the community, in a sense of place and continuity. In a world where external forces, war, famine, political upheaval, could constantly threaten stability, the hearth represented a core of enduring resistance, a place where life could continue, nurtured and protected. This is where the quirky tidbit about the public hearths comes in again, but with a slightly different angle. Remember the Prytanean, the town hall, with its perpetual flame? This public hearth, the Koine Hestia, common hearth, was essentially the city's communal living room, its civic heart. It wasn't just a symbol. It was often the place where foreign ambassadors were received, guests of the city were hosted, and where important civic oaths were sworn. A mainstream historical fact is that maintaining this perpetual flame was a significant civic duty, often overseen by important officials. This shows that Hestia's domain wasn't solely private. It extended to the idea of community and shared identity, but still within the context of a defined, central, domestic space for the city itself. Even at the civic level, her power was about gathering, nurturing, and providing a stable center, not about external conquest or display. It was the hearth of the city, not the city's army headquarters or its treasury. Historians still argue whether the prominence of Hestia and the hearth cult in ancient Greece reflects a specific emphasis on the nuclear family unit compared to other ancient cultures, or if it points to a very ancient layer of Indo-European religious belief centered around the sacred fire, predating the development of the more complex Olympian pantheon. This scholarly debate highlights just how foundational and perhaps archaic her worship is. She represents something so fundamental to human society, the need for a safe, warm, central place, that her origins might lie deeper than the dramatic tales of Zeus and his siblings. Her domain being the hearth meant her concerns were fundamentally different from the gods of external power. While Ares was off inciting battles and Athena was strategizing for victory, Hestia was ensuring the fire didn't go out, that the home remained sacred, that families had a safe place to be. Her power was immense, but it was internal, focused on the well-being of individuals and families rather than the fate of nations or the balance of cosmic forces. It's like everyone else was running the noisy, messy parts of the universe, the government, the military, international relations, and Hestia was quietly keeping the lights on and making sure everyone had dinner waiting when they got home. You can't really have a dramatic showdown over who gets to control the temperature of the stew, can you? Or argue over whose turn it is to clean the cosmic chimney? Her realm simply didn't lend itself to the kind of external conflict and competition that defined the lives of her siblings. She embodied peace and stability because that was the very essence of her sacred space. And in a pantheon full of gods constantly jockeying for position, this quiet, grounding domain was perhaps the first and most significant reason she remained largely aloof from the drama. So, you've got Hestia, this ancient, foundational goddess, sister of Zeus, survivor of Cronus's gut, now taking her place on Mount Olympus. But while she's technically part of the divine council, her sacred realm is the hearth and home, this quiet, domestic space that is the absolute heart of ancient Greek life. And this grounding domain stands in stark, almost comical, contrast to the spheres of influence her siblings carved out for themselves. Think about it. Zeus rules the sky, controls the weather, and is king of the gods. His domain is literally everywhere, vast, unpredictable, and constantly interacting with the mortal world in dramatic ways, throwing lightning bolts, descending as swans or bulls to pursue various romantic interests. Mainstream historical fact: Zeus's numerous affairs and transformations are central to countless Greek myths. His power is external, overwhelming, and often disruptive. Poseidon commands the seas, oceans, rivers, and is lord of earthquakes. His realm is equally vast, powerful, and notoriously moody, prone to violent storms and tsunamis. His interactions with the world are often forceful and destructive. Hades rules the underworld, a realm entirely separate from the living, a place of shadows and the dead. While perhaps less directly involved in the day-to-day squabbles of Olympus, his domain is inherently tied to mortality and the end of life, a heavy, somber sphere. Then you have the next generation of major Olympians, many of whom were also children of Zeus, sometimes with Hera, sometimes with others. Ares is the god of brutal, chaotic war. His domain is the battlefield, the clash of arms, the shedding of blood. Conflict isn't just part of his realm, it is his realm. Athena is the goddess of strategic warfare, wisdom, crafts, and cities. While also associated with peace and crafts, her myths are full of her involvement in battles and her clever interventions in human conflicts. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. Her domain sounds lovely, but as anyone who's ever been in a complicated relationship knows, love and desire are prime sources of drama, jealousy, and conflict, both mortal and divine. Hephaestus is the god of fire, metalworking, and crafts, the smith of the gods. His domain is the forge, a place of intense heat and creation, but his personal life is often embroiled in the drama of his marriage to Aphrodite and her infidelities. Hermes is the messenger god, god of travelers, merchants, thieves, and trickery. His domain is movement, communication, and boundaries, and crossing them, inherently involving interaction, negotiation, and sometimes deception. Apollo and Artemis rule over spheres like music, poetry, healing, archery, the hunt, and the moon/sun in some traditions. Even their domains, while perhaps less overtly conflict-driven than Ares, involve external interaction, competition, musical contests, hunting prowess, and dramatic interventions in human lives, sending plagues, protecting hunters. Their power is exerted outwardly, shaping the world, interfering in human affairs, and inevitably clashing with each other. They vie for honor, influence, and resources. They get jealous over mortals, over temples, over who has the coolest divine gadget. Their myths are narratives of action, consequence, and often conflict. It's like they're all running cosmic corporations, constantly trying to undercut each other, merge with rivals, or launch hostile takeovers of divine turf. Now turn your gaze back to Hestia. Her domain is the hearth, the home, domesticity, family. Her power isn't about controlling external forces like weather or war or the movement of people. It's about presence. It's about stability. It's about the internal order and warmth of the most fundamental human unit, the family within the home. Her power isn't exerted outwardly to change the world. It's focused inwardly to maintain the sanctity and safety of a specific, defined space. She doesn't make lightning, she keeps the fire burning. She doesn't stir up seas, she provides a safe harbor from the storm. She doesn't incite war, she represents the peace that war destroys. This fundamental difference in domain is the primary reason she avoids the squabbles. Her realm simply doesn't intersect with the arenas of conflict her siblings inhabit. How do you start a divine feud over who gets to oversee the boiling of lentils? What cause for war is there in ensuring the domestic fire doesn't go out? The issues that fuel Olympian drama, territorial disputes, romantic rivalries, contests of strength or skill, interventions in large-scale human events, simply don't arise from the quiet, contained world of the hearth. Her power is subtle, not spectacular. It's the enduring strength of continuity, the comfort of routine, the security of belonging. While Zeus's power is the thunderclap, Hestia's is the steady glow of embers. While Ares's is the battle cry, Hestia's is the quiet murmur of conversation around the dinner table. You don't stage a coup against the goddess of making sure everyone has a warm place to sleep. It's just not conducive to high drama. A quirky tidbit that highlights this contrast: unlike most major Greek deities, Hestia had very few dedicated temples. While grand structures were erected for Zeus, Athena, Apollo, and others in cities across the Greek world, Hestia's primary place of worship was, as we've discussed, the family hearth in every single home. This lack of monumental public temples reinforces her intimate, domestic focus. Her presence was ubiquitous but quiet, woven into the fabric of daily life rather than towering over it. It's like her siblings needed flashy headquarters, but Hestia was perfectly happy working from home before it was cool. Historians still argue whether Hestia's relatively limited narrative mythology, compared to her siblings, is a consequence of her domestic domain, which simply didn't lend itself to epic tales of heroes and monsters, or if it reflects a shift in religious focus over time, where more anthropomorphic and politically involved deities gained prominence over older, more abstract concepts like the sacred fire. This scholarly debate underscores how different she is. Her lack of dramatic stories isn't just a coincidence, it seems intrinsically linked to her nature and domain. Her power isn't about changing the world outside the home, but about preserving the world within it. And in a pantheon obsessed with external power struggles, this internal focus acted like a shield. She wasn't competing for territory or influence in the same game her siblings were playing. She had already claimed a realm that was essential, non-competitive, and fundamentally peaceful. While her siblings were busy trying to conquer the universe, Hestia was content to make sure the home front was secure. It's hard to get into a cosmic shouting match when your main concern is whether the bread is rising properly. This inherent difference in domain and the nature of her power is perhaps the most significant factor in explaining why Hestia remained so famously aloof from the endless, messy squabbles of her fellow Olympians. So, you've seen how Hestia's domain, the quiet, internal world of the hearth, is fundamentally different from the vast, external, and often chaotic realms of her siblings. While they were out there controlling the weather, inciting wars, or stirring up passion across the cosmos, Hestia was focused on keeping the home fire burning. But this difference in domain is only one piece of the puzzle. Another crucial factor in her avoidance of Olympian squabbles lies in a very personal choice she made, one that directly removed her from one of the most common sources of divine conflict: relationships and marriage. Now, divine relationships on Olympus were, shall we say, complicated. They were rarely simple matters of affection. Marriages between gods were often strategic alliances, sources of power struggles, and breeding grounds for jealousy, infidelity, and outright hostility. Just look at Zeus and Hera, the king and queen of the gods, locked in an eternal cycle of Zeus's affairs and Hera's vengeful fury. Or Aphrodite, married to the steady but perhaps unexciting Hephaestus, constantly entangled with the volatile Ares, causing drama wherever she went. Divine relationships were prime material for the kind of messy squabbles that defined so much of Olympian life. As a powerful goddess, one of the original six, Hestia was naturally a desirable consort. In the early days of the Olympian reign, after the Titanomachy had settled down and the gods were figuring out their place in the new order, she received overtures from some seriously heavy hitters. We're talking about two of the most powerful male gods in the pantheon, her own brothers, Poseidon, lord of the seas and earthquakes, and Apollo, god of light, music, prophecy, and so much more. Imagine the scene on Mount Olympus. The new palace is set up, the gods are finding their footing, and here are these two major players, Apollo and Poseidon, both approaching Hestia, seeking her hand. Poseidon, perhaps fresh from creating some magnificent new island or stirring up a storm just because he could, presents his case. He's powerful, controls vast domains, has a cool trident. A solid catch, by divine standards. Then there's Apollo, radiant, charming, perhaps playing a lovely tune on his lyre to set the mood. He offers light, art, prophecy. Also a very powerful and influential god. Either match would have significantly elevated Hestia's profile in the external, political landscape of Olympus, tying her to immense power and potentially vast territories. But Hestia wasn't interested. She wasn't swayed by their power, their domains, or their divine charm, and let's face it, divine charm could be pretty potent. Instead of accepting either proposal, or even trying to play them off against each other for some kind of advantage, which, let's be honest, is exactly what many other Olympians would have done, Hestia went straight to Zeus, her brother and the new king. Standing before Zeus, on the very peak of Mount Olympus, with Poseidon and Apollo presumably looking on with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance, Hestia made a solemn vow. She swore by the head of Zeus, one of the strongest possible oaths a god could make, that she would remain eternally a virgin. She would never marry, never take a consort, never bear children. She dedicated herself, instead, to her chosen domain, the hearth and home. Zeus, perhaps recognizing the wisdom in this, or maybe just relieved to avoid a potential conflict between two of his most powerful brothers over his sister, accepted her vow. In return for her dedication and her promise of eternal chastity, Zeus granted her a special honor. She would receive the first portion of every public sacrifice, and her place in the homes of humans would be secure and revered. This act of Hestia vowing eternal virginity to Zeus is a mainstream historical fact within the core Greek myths about the Olympian gods. It's a pivotal moment that defines her status and removes her from the typical cycle of divine marriage and procreation. Why did she do this? It wasn't because she was inherently anti-marriage or disliked Poseidon or Apollo as individuals, though one can only imagine the potential for drama with either of them as a spouse. It was a strategic choice, a deliberate act to secure her peace and solidify her unique status outside the competitive fray. By rejecting marriage, especially to such powerful and potentially rivalrous gods, she removed herself from the endless cycle of marital disputes, jealousies, and power struggles that plagued her siblings. Think about the alternatives. If she had married Poseidon, she would have been constantly embroiled in his moods, his rivalries with Zeus, and his various affairs. If she had married Apollo, she might have been caught up in his frequent disputes, his sometimes tragic romances, and his contests with other gods or mortals. Her life would have become intertwined with the external, often chaotic, dramas of their vast domains. By choosing virginity, she chose independence. She chose not to be defined or entangled by a relationship with a male god whose sphere of influence was inherently external and conflict-prone. Her virginity wasn't a sign of weakness or irrelevance. It was a source of her unique strength. Along with Athena and Artemis, Hestia is one of the three principal virgin goddesses in the Greek pantheon. This is a quirky tidbit. While many goddesses were defined by their roles as wives and mothers, these three carved out powerful identities independent of male consorts. Athena embodied strategic wisdom and civic life, Artemis the wild independence of nature and the hunt, and Hestia the steadfast sanctity of the home. Their virginity wasn't about prudishness. It was about self-possession and a specific kind of power not derived from or shared with a male partner. It allowed them to operate on their own terms, pursuing their unique domains without the complications of divine marriage. Historians still argue whether the concept of powerful virgin goddesses in the Greek pantheon reflects specific societal anxieties or ideals surrounding female autonomy, or if it perhaps stems from older, pre-Olympian religious traditions where certain female deities were worshipped in ways that didn't involve consorts. This scholarly debate highlights how unusual and significant their status was. It wasn't the default for powerful goddesses. Hestia's vows secured her peace by making her untouchable in the most common arena of divine conflict. No husband to argue with, no children to have favorites among or worry about, no in-laws to navigate, as if the Olympians needed more complex family dynamics. She was free to focus entirely on her domain, the hearth, a realm that, as we've seen, was inherently peaceful and stable. Her status was secured not through alliance or procreation, but through her fundamental importance to every home and community, acknowledged by Zeus himself and honored with the first portion of sacrifices. While her siblings were busy navigating the treacherous waters of divine marriage and its inevitable fallout, Hestia was safely anchored in her self-chosen harbor of domestic peace. Her decision to remain a virgin goddess was more than just a personal preference. It was a strategic withdrawal from the divine dating pool, a conscious choice to avoid a major source of the very squabbles she seemed destined to float above. It solidified her unique position, ensuring that her power remained focused inward, on the quiet strength of home, rather than being drawn outward into the dramatic, conflict-ridden world of Olympian relationships. It's like everyone else was signing up for a reality show full of hookups and arguments, and Hestia politely declined, opting instead for a quiet life focused on crafting cozy vibes. A wise choice, honestly. So Hestia stands before Zeus, makes her solemn vow by his head, no marriage, no consort, eternal virginity. Zeus accepts, grants her honor, first dibs on public sacrifices, and ensures her reverence in every home. This isn't just a personal preference, remember? This is a cosmic mic drop, a deliberate step away from a major source of endless, messy, divine strife, relationships. Because let's be honest, if Olympus had a reality TV show, and it basically did, minus the cameras, the taglines would all be about who was sleeping with whom, who was jealous, and whose divine offspring was causing the most trouble this week. Divine relationships in Greek mythology were less about quiet companionship and more about power dynamics, strategic alliances, and explosive drama. They were often the catalyst for major conflicts, both among the gods themselves and between gods and mortals. Look at Zeus and Hera, the king and queen. Their marriage is a textbook example of divine marital conflict, a mainstream historical fact woven into countless myths. Zeus, the perpetually unfaithful husband, constantly sneaking off with nymphs, mortals, and even other goddesses. Hera, the queen, powerful and proud, driven to furious vengeance against Zeus's lovers and their unfortunate offspring. Her wrath is legendary, fueling entire epic poems and tragic plays. Her life, and the lives of many others, were defined by the fallout from Zeus's infidelity and her reactions to it. This wasn't quiet simmering. This was divine scorched earth, involving curses, monsters, and heroic quests designed explicitly to punish the products of Zeus's affairs. Imagine living with that kind of tension. Every time Zeus popped out for a quick trip to Earth, Hera was probably already sharpening her divine claws and checking her list of potential targets. Then you have Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, married to the lame but skilled craftsman Hephaestus. Their marriage was famously unhappy, largely due to Aphrodite's very public and long-standing affair with Ares, the god of war. This love triangle wasn't a secret. It was fodder for divine gossip and even humiliation, as immortalized in myths where Hephaestus catches them in a specially forged net and puts them on display for the other gods to mock. This affair wasn't just personal drama. It often spilled over, influencing events on Earth, stirring up conflict, and sometimes even involving other gods in the mess. Their relationship was a constant source of tension and awkwardness on Olympus. Even divine parentage was a minefield of potential conflict. Gods often had children with multiple partners, leading to complex family trees rife with rivalries. Think of the animosity between Zeus's legitimate children with Hera, like Ares or Hephaestus, and his illegitimate children with others, like Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Heracles. These half-siblings often had conflicting loyalties and agendas, leading to disputes that could escalate quickly. The gods weren't exactly paragons of healthy co-parenting. Now, contrast all of that glorious chaos with Hestia. By taking her vow of eternal virginity, she removed herself from all of it. No husband means no marital disputes, no infidelity to deal with, either her own or a partner's, and no spousal domain to get dragged into. No children means no rivalries between divine offspring, no need to play favorites, and no potential for her kids to become targets of another god's wrath, like Hera's relentless pursuit of Heracles. She didn't have to worry about Poseidon getting into a fight with Zeus over something and suddenly finding herself in the middle, or Apollo having a bad day and her having to deal with his divine mood swings. Her life was her own, free from the intricate, often toxic, web of divine relationships that ensnared her siblings. Her freedom wasn't just theoretical, it was practical. While her siblings were busy navigating complex family dynamics, dealing with jealous spouses, or intervening in the lives of their mortal children, Hestia was focused entirely on her domain. Her energy wasn't spent on managing a difficult divine marriage or refereeing squabbles between her kids. It was dedicated to the quiet, constant work of maintaining the sanctity and warmth of the hearth, both in individual homes and in the community. This freedom from relationship-fueled strife allowed her to maintain her unique position of neutrality and peace. She didn't have a partner whose alliances or rivalries could pull her into a conflict. She didn't have children whose actions might demand her intervention or defense, pitting her against other gods. She was, in a very real sense, self-contained, her sphere of influence centered not on external relationships, but on an internal principle, the stability of the home. Consider a quirky tidbit here. While many myths involve gods pursuing mortals or other divine beings, often leading to dramatic and sometimes tragic outcomes, like Apollo's relentless pursuit of the nymph Daphne, who transformed into a laurel tree to escape him, a direct consequence of romantic pursuit driven by external forces like Eros's arrows, Hestia is never depicted in such narratives. No god is chasing her. She is not chasing anyone. Her vow removed her from the possibility of being the subject or agent of these kinds of relationship-driven dramas that filled the myths of her siblings. It's hard to have a dramatic transformation into a plant to escape someone when you've already sworn off romantic entanglements forever. Crisis averted. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on divine relationships and their resulting conflicts in Greek mythology reflects actual societal anxieties about marriage and family dynamics, or if it's simply a narrative device used to create compelling stories and explain human behavior and the natural world through divine actions. This scholarly debate highlights how central these relationship dramas were to the myths themselves. They weren't just background noise, they were often the main plot. But Hestia, through her deliberate choice, opted out of that main plot. Her vow of virginity wasn't just a rejection of suitors, it was a rejection of the drama that inevitably accompanied divine relationships. It secured her independence and ensured that her power remained focused on her peaceful domain, rather than being diverted into the endless cycle of jealousy, rivalry, and conflict that defined the lives of her siblings who chose, or were chosen for, marriage and family. She traded the potential for external power that came with marrying a major god for the guaranteed peace and internal strength that came with being entirely self-possessed and dedicated to her quiet, fundamental realm. It was perhaps the ultimate strategic move for a goddess who valued stability over spectacle. So, you've seen how Hestia's domain, the peaceful hearth, and her personal choice, the vow of eternal virginity, both served to distance her from the typical sources of Olympian conflict. These factors didn't just keep her out of the drama, they shaped her presence on Mount Olympus itself. While she was undeniably one of the most senior and foundational deities, a sister to the king of the gods and a survivor of the Cronus-era trauma, her participation in the Divine Council was notably different from her siblings. She was on Olympus, part of the ruling body, but she wasn't of its squabbles. Imagine the scene on Mount Olympus during a typical divine assembly. Zeus is probably holding court, perhaps juggling a lightning bolt idly while listening to petitions or complaints. Hera is likely seated beside him, looking regal but possibly with a simmering gaze fixed on whatever goddess Zeus last paid attention to. Poseidon might be grumbling about something happening in the sea, maybe a sailor forgot to make an offering or someone littered. Ares is probably itching for a fight, sharpening his spear on the celestial marble. Athena is offering strategic advice, Apollo is perhaps providing some background music, or complaining about a mortal challenging him to a lyre contest, and Aphrodite is looking fabulous and probably causing silent chaos just by existing. It's a room full of immense power, vast egos, and volatile personalities, all with their own agendas and domains that constantly overlap and clash. Decisions on war, peace, human fate, divine interventions, they were all debated, and sometimes shouted, here. And in the midst of all this divine noise and fury, there was Hestia. Her presence was constant, yes, but it was also quiet. She wasn't known for making dramatic pronouncements, engaging in heated arguments, or pushing her own agenda in the same way her siblings did. While other gods might storm out of the assembly in a fit of pique, or use the council meetings to further their own rivalries, Hestia remained a steady, unassuming figure. She was there, a recognized and respected member of the core pantheon, but she didn't seem to engage in the political maneuvering or the personal conflicts that consumed the others. Her power wasn't the kind that needed to be asserted through public displays or debates. It was inherent in her being, in the fundamental importance of her domain. While the other gods' authority often derived from controlling external forces or spheres of influence, Hestia's authority came from being the embodiment of something internal and essential to everyone. You didn't need to convince people to honor Hestia. Her importance was self-evident every time a fire was lit on a hearth. This quiet, inherent authority meant she didn't need to compete for recognition or power in the same way her siblings did. She already had it, in a different form. Think about the kinds of stories we hear about the Olympian Council. They are full of dramatic votes, alliances forming and breaking, gods threatening each other, and Zeus ultimately making the final call, sometimes after much divine drama. Yet, Hestia rarely features prominently in these narratives of divine politics. She's listed as one of the 12, initially, before later developments we'll get to. She's acknowledged as a primary goddess, but her actions within the council chambers are seldom described in detail. It's almost as if she was the divine equivalent of the person who attends all the meetings, is definitely on the board, but mostly just listens and occasionally offers a calm, grounding perspective that everyone respects but few follow when the opportunity for drama arises. Her quiet constancy on Olympus reflects the nature of her domain. The hearth fire is constant. It burns day and night, providing warmth and light without demanding attention or making a fuss. It doesn't change dramatically with the seasons or wage war on rival elements. It simply is, providing a steady, reliable presence. Hestia embodied this same quality on Olympus. While her siblings' moods and actions were as unpredictable as the weather or the seas, Hestia was the steady center. She wasn't prone to fits of rage, fits of passion, or sudden, dramatic interventions driven by personal whims or rivalries. A mainstream historical fact about the Olympian Council is that while the core group of 12 major deities was widely recognized, the specific composition could sometimes vary slightly depending on the region or time period, though Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hestia, initially, Demeter, and the main children of Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Athena, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Hermes, were almost always included in some form. This fluidity in the exact lineup of the 12 makes Hestia's later decision to yield her seat particularly notable, which we will discuss soon. Her lack of involvement in the squabbles wasn't due to a lack of importance or power, it was a consequence of her nature and focus. She wasn't vying for external control, wasn't entangled in messy relationships that spilled over into council politics. and her domain was inherently peaceful. It's hard to get into a shouting match with the goddess who represents the quiet sanctity of home. What would the argument even be about? Hestia, you're being too peaceful. Can't you stir up some domestic discord for once? No thank you, Ares, I'm quite happy ensuring families have a warm meal. See? Doesn't make for good drama. There's a quirky tidbit related to her presence. In some traditions, it was believed that Hestia had a special room or area within the palace on Mount Olympus dedicated to her, where a perpetual fire burned, mirroring the hearth in human homes. This wouldn't have been a grand throne room or a war council chamber, but a quiet, central space, constantly tended. It reinforces her role as the anchor, the steady heart of even the divine dwelling. While her siblings were out conquering or scheming, Hestia was back at the celestial pad, keeping the home fires burning. Historians still argue whether Hestia's quiet role on Olympus reflects a patriarchal bias in the surviving myths, where female deities associated with domesticity were given less dramatic narrative space compared to those associated with warfare, politics, or procreation, or if it accurately represents a genuine aspect of her worship and perceived divine nature. This scholarly debate highlights the unusual nature of her portrayal. She's a major goddess, but her story isn't told in the same action-packed way as her male, and even some of her female, siblings. Her presence on Olympus was less about asserting dominance, and more about embodying a fundamental principle. She was the living symbol of stability, continuity, and the sacredness of the inner world, a necessary counterpoint to the external chaos and ambition of her fellow gods. While they were busy shaping the world through dramatic interventions and conflicts, Hestia was ensuring that the most basic unit of human, and perhaps even divine, society, the home, remained intact and sacred. She didn't need to be loud to be important. Her power was felt not in the clash of thunder or the roar of the sea, but in the quiet comfort of a warm hearth, a comfort that was essential to the well-being of both mortals and, arguably, the gods themselves, providing a silent anchor in the sometimes stormy seas of Olympian life. She was the quiet eye of the divine hurricane, always present, always steady, a silent reminder of the peace that existed outside the endless, messy squabbles. So, you've got Hestia, this quiet, steady presence on Mount Olympus, a sister to Zeus, a survivor of the Cronus incident, and a goddess who deliberately opted out of the messy world of divine relationships by taking a vow of eternal virginity. She's on the council of the 12 Olympians, present for the divine assemblies, but she's not engaging in the power struggles or the dramatic arguments that consume her siblings. Her power is rooted in the internal, peaceful domain of the hearth, a stark contrast to their external, often chaotic spheres. She's there, but she's not really in the game of divine politics. And then, something happens that highlights this distinction even more dramatically. The composition of the 12 Olympians wasn't necessarily fixed from the absolute beginning of time. While the original 6 children of Cronus and Rhea, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, Demeter, formed the core, plus Zeus's most prominent children, the exact lineup could shift slightly in different traditions or stories. Think of it like a celestial band with a few rotating guest members, though the lead singers, Zeus and Hera, were always the same. One such arrival on the scene was Dionysus. Now, Dionysus is the god of wine, revelry, theater, religious ecstasy, and general boundary breaking. He's the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele, a dramatic story in itself involving Hera's jealousy, and Semele being tricked into seeing Zeus in his full divine glory, which incinerated her. Yikes! Despite his mortal mother, Dionysus was granted divine status, often achieved through his conquests, and the spread of his worship throughout the Greek world. His arrival on Olympus was significant. He was a powerful, popular, and often disruptive force, bringing a very different energy to the divine pantheon. He was, in short, loud. As a powerful, widely worshipped god, Dionysus naturally had a claim to a place among the principal deities, the ruling council of 12. But the council slots were already full. There were the original 6 siblings, minus Hades, who typically resided in the underworld and wasn't always counted among the 12 residents of Olympus, though he was definitely one of the major gods, plus the main children of Zeus. So, if Dionysus was going to join the A-list gods residing on the mountain, someone had to make room. This is where Hestia makes a move that perfectly encapsulates her non-competitive nature and her unique perspective. While other gods might have fiercely defended their position, argued their seniority, or engaged in political maneuvering to keep a newcomer out, Hestia voluntarily yielded her seat to Dionysus. She stepped aside, giving up her place among the 12 ruling Olympians so that the younger god could join the council. This act of Hestia yielding her seat to Dionysus is a mainstream historical fact found in many accounts of the 12 Olympians, particularly in later traditions where Dionysus became increasingly prominent. It's often cited as the reason why Hestia is sometimes listed as one of the original 6, but not always included in the later lists of the 12 Olympians, who resided on the mountain and held council. She gave up her seat on the council, but not her status as a primary goddess. She was still Hestia, goddess of the hearth, still revered in every home, still receiving the first portion of sacrifices. She just wasn't attending the divine board meetings anymore. Why would she do this? Why give up such a prestigious position? It goes back to everything we've discussed about her nature and domain. Her power wasn't derived from her position on the council or her involvement in Olympian politics. Her power was inherent in the fundamental importance of the hearth to human and divine life. Being on the council meant participating in the very squabbles she seemed so naturally inclined to avoid. It meant being present for the endless debates, the rivalries, the power plays, the drama that she had already strategically distanced herself from through her domain and her vow of virginity. Yielding her seat wasn't a demotion, it was an affirmation of her priorities. It showed that the status and political influence that came with being one of the 12 ruling Olympians meant less to her than the peace and focus required for her true domain. She didn't need a seat at the table of external power to be important. Her importance was already guaranteed by her presence in every home. It's like she looked at the divine council meetings and thought, "You know what? You guys seem like you're having a lot of fun arguing about who gets to smite which city-state, but I've got this fire to tend. It's much quieter and, frankly, more essential." This act highlights her non-competitive nature. She wasn't vying for power or status. She wasn't threatened by Dionysus's arrival, or his claim to a place among the foremost gods. While other gods might have seen Dionysus as a rival for influence or worship, Hestia saw an opportunity to gracefully withdraw from the political arena without diminishing her own fundamental importance. It was a selfless act in a pantheon not exactly known for selflessness. Imagine Ares giving up his seat for, well, anyone. Or Hera deciding Zeus's latest affair wasn't really worth a cosmic tantrum. Unthinkable. But for Hestia, it made perfect sense. Her strength wasn't in competing for a spot. It was in embodying her peaceful, essential domain. There's a quirky tidbit related to this. Some versions of the myth suggest that Hestia wasn't just yielding her seat to Dionysus because he arrived, but also because she was weary of the constant bickering and drama of the Olympian Council. While not explicitly stated in all myths, it fits perfectly with her character. The Divine Council was a hotbed of tension, arguments, and rivalries. For a goddess whose essence was peace and stability, sitting through those meetings must have been like attending a celestial family Thanksgiving that never ended, with everyone constantly arguing about who brought the worst ambrosia salad. Stepping away would have been less about giving something up and more about gaining blessed quiet. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of Dionysus among the 12 and the exclusion of Hestia in some lists reflects a shift in religious practices over time, where the ecstatic, communal worship associated with Dionysus gained prominence, while the older, more domestic worship of Hestia remained vital but perhaps less politically centralized. This scholarly debate highlights how dynamic Greek religion was. The pantheon wasn't a static list, and changes in its composition could reflect changing societal or religious emphasis. Hestia's voluntary departure from the council solidified her unique position as a goddess who existed somewhat apart from the main current of Olympian politics and power struggles. She wasn't pushed out, she chose to step back. She traded external status for internal peace, and the freedom to focus entirely on her sacred realm. It was an act of quiet strength, demonstrating that true power isn't always about having a seat at the most important table, but about knowing where your real value lies and being content in that space. She didn't need the title Olympian Council member to be Hestia, the revered goddess of the hearth. Her domain was everywhere, in every home, a constant, quiet presence that needed no dramatic pronouncements or political maneuvering to assert its fundamental importance. While her siblings were busy ruling the world from their mountain peak, Hestia was quietly ensuring the world had a warm, safe place to call home. So, Hestia opts out of the divine council, gracefully yielding her seat to the newcomer, Dionysus. This wasn't an abdication of power or importance, but a powerful statement about where her true power lay. She didn't need a literal chair on Mount Olympus to be Hestia, the revered goddess whose presence was felt in every home. Her domain wasn't a territory to be governed from a distance. It was the very core of human existence, the hearth, and its deep symbolic meaning is what truly set her apart and kept her anchored far away from the squabbles of her siblings. Step inside that ancient Greek home again. The hearth wasn't just a place to cook dinner, though obviously, that was pretty important unless you were a big fan of cold, raw grains. It was the physical and spiritual heart of the house, the oikos, which, remember, callback, was the fundamental unit of Greek society. More than just a fireplace, it was an altar, a sanctuary, a symbol of continuity and identity. Imagine it, a raised stone or clay structure, or perhaps just a dedicated spot on the floor, where the fire burned constantly, if possible. This fire wasn't just a source of heat and light, it was Hestia's presence made manifest. The hearth was the site of countless rituals that underscored its sacred importance. Before every meal, a small offering, usually of food or drink, would be made to Hestia at the hearth. It was a simple, daily acknowledgement of her role as the guardian of the home and the provider of nourishment and safety. Think of it as the ancient Greek equivalent of saying grace, but specifically thanking the divine embodiment of your kitchen appliance. It was also the place where solemn oaths were sworn, binding promises made with the sacred fire as witness. You didn't break a vow made by Hestia's hearth. That was asking for some serious divine bad luck, probably involving your soup perpetually boiling over. Crucially, the hearth was the center of family rites of passage. Remember the amphidromia ceremony we mentioned earlier? This was the ritual where a newborn child was carried around the hearth by the father, formally introducing them to the household gods and the family. It was an act of incorporation, making the child officially part of the oikos, under Hestia's protection. The hearth wasn't just where you lived, it was where you became you, within the context of your family and community. It was also where the dead were sometimes laid out before burial, and where mourning rituals took place, symbolizing the cyclical nature of life and death centered around the enduring flame. The fire might be extinguished during deep mourning, a stark symbol of life's temporary absence, only to be relit from a neighbor's hearth or a public fire, a quirky tidbit that beautifully illustrates the connection between individual homes and the wider community through Hestia's domain. It shows that the hearth's power extended beyond the individual home, linking families together in a network of shared warmth and tradition. This deep symbolic meaning of the hearth explains why Hestia's domain was so resistant to the kind of external conflict that defined her siblings' realms. Her power wasn't about control over something external, but about the sacredness and stability within a defined space. The hearth represented peace, security, and the nurturing core of life. It was the antithesis of war, Ares, storms, Poseidon, wild nature, Artemis, or external political maneuvering, Zeus, Athena. You don't fight over who gets to keep the fire burning. You cooperate to ensure it stays lit. You don't launch invasions from your hearth. You seek refuge there. Seeking sanctuary at a hearth, whether private or public, was a recognized custom, protected by Hestia herself, a mainstream historical fact that underscores the hearth's role as a place of inviolable safety. Anyone seeking refuge there, even enemies, was under her divine protection, a powerful testament to the peace inherent in her domain. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on the hearth cult in ancient Greece reflects an early, pre-Olympian focus on fire worship and the domestic sphere, or if it developed alongside the anthropomorphic Olympian pantheon as a necessary counterpoint to their often chaotic and external focus. This scholarly debate highlights just how distinct Hestia and her domain were from the more dramatic gods who dominated later Greek myths. Her power wasn't expressed in grand narratives of conquest or dramatic interventions, but in the quiet, constant rhythm of daily life centered around the fire. Her domain was essential, yes, perhaps the most essential thing for survival and community, but it didn't lend itself to dramatic stories of conflict and rivalry. Can you imagine an epic poem about Hestia thwarting a rival goddess who wanted to make the family hearth produce lukewarm embers? Or a divine showdown over who gets to supervise the baking of flatbread? It just doesn't have the same narrative punch as Zeus versus Titans, or Athena versus Poseidon over Athens, or Ares causing general mayhem. Her realm was too fundamental, too peaceful, too internal for external squabbles. Hestia embodied the values of the hearth: stability, continuity, warmth, and sanctuary. While her siblings were busy defining themselves through their interactions with the external world, conquering, ruling, creating art, waging war, falling in love dramatically, Hestia was focused on maintaining the inner world, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Her power was the quiet strength of endurance, the comfort of the familiar, the security of knowing you had a safe place to return to. It wasn't the kind of power that needed to be asserted through conflict. Its importance was simply understood, felt in the warmth of the fire and the safety of the home. This deep symbolic connection to peace and stability, inherent in her domain, was perhaps the most profound reason she remained so famously aloof from the endless, messy squabbles of her fellow Olympians. She didn't need to fight for her place. Her place was already everywhere, in the heart of every home, a quiet, constant presence that needed no drama to prove its worth. Her domain was everywhere, in every home, a constant, quiet presence that needed no drama to prove its worth. And because her domain was so fundamental, so woven into the fabric of daily life, the ways the ancient Greeks honored Hestia were just as quiet and fundamental. You didn't see massive festivals thrown in her name with athletic contests and processions of thousands, like you might for Zeus or Athena. You didn't have wild, ecstatic rites like those for Dionysus, or public displays of grief and joy tied to the harvest, like for Demeter. Hestia's worship was, for the most part, profoundly personal and domestic. It happened every single day, in countless small ways, around the hearth. The most common act of reverence for Hestia was incredibly simple. Before every meal shared by the family, a small offering would be made to her at the hearth. This wasn't a grand sacrifice involving expensive animals or elaborate ceremonies. It might be just a tiny portion of the food that was about to be eaten, or a libation of wine, water, or oil poured onto the fire or the hearthstones. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a moment of gratitude for the warmth, the nourishment, the safety, and the continuity that the hearth, and thus Hestia, provided. This daily offering at the hearth was a mainstream historical fact, a ubiquitous practice in ancient Greek homes, far more frequent than visits to public temples for other gods. It underscores how deeply integrated Hestia was into the rhythm of everyday life, a constant, gentle presence rather than a distant deity requiring grand gestures. Think about the contrast. While other gods demanded impressive temples, expensive statues, and public sacrifices involving the slaughter of animals, rituals that were often public, spectacular, and sometimes tied to political power or citywide identity, Hestia was honored with a spoonful of stew or a splash of wine in the privacy of the home. It was a humble form of worship, reflecting the humility of her domain, but its constant repetition across thousands of homes gave it an immense cumulative power. It was the divine equivalent of consistent, small acts of kindness versus occasional grand gestures. Hestia received the quiet, steady love, not the flashy, infrequent adoration. This simplicity extended to other forms of honoring her. Prayers to Hestia were often simple, heartfelt requests for protection, warmth, and stability for the home and family. Oaths sworn by her hearth were binding because the hearth was the sacred center, the witness to truth and continuity. Seeking refuge at the hearth, whether in a private home or a public building, placed a person under Hestia's inviolable protection. You couldn't harm someone huddled by Hestia's fire without incurring her divine displeasure, and given her fundamental importance, that was a risk few were willing to take. It was a powerful, yet passive, form of divine authority. She didn't need to strike you down. Her mere association with the space was enough to make it sacred and protected. Even the public worship of Hestia mirrored this focus on a central, enduring fire. Remember the Prytanean, the town hall, with its koine Hestia, the common hearth? This public hearth was the civic equivalent of the home hearth, the symbolic center of the community. A perpetual flame was kept burning there, tended by officials, a constant symbol of the city's life and continuity. This eternal flame wasn't just for show. It was where official guests were received, where certain civic oaths were sworn, and it served as the source for the flame carried by colonists when founding new settlements. Carrying a flame from the mother city's public hearth to light the new colony's hearth was a poignant ritual, a quirky tidbit that beautifully illustrates how Hestia's domain linked communities across vast distances, not through political treaties or military might, but through the shared symbol of home and origin. It's like a cosmic relay race, but instead of a baton, they're passing a piece of divine warmth. Much cozier, honestly. Historians still argue whether the relatively simple and domestic nature of Hestia's worship, compared to the elaborate cults of other major deities, indicates that she represents a more ancient layer of Greek religious practice, perhaps predating the development of the more complex, anthropomorphic Olympian pantheon, or if it simply reflects the functional and private nature of her domain. This scholarly debate highlights just how unique her position was. Her worship didn't fit neatly into the mold of the major state-sponsored cults of other gods. The quiet, unassuming ways in which Greeks honored Hestia were perfectly aligned with her nature and her domain. She wasn't a goddess who demanded attention through spectacle or fear. Her power was in her constancy, her reliability, her fundamental necessity. You didn't need to perform dramatic rituals to get Hestia's notice. She was already there, in the heart of your home, present whenever the fire was lit. Her worship wasn't about appeasing a volatile deity or asking for dramatic favors. It was about acknowledging a fundamental truth: the home, centered around the hearth, was the source of warmth, safety, and life itself. This lack of emphasis on grand, public worship and dramatic interaction with her devotees also contributed to her absence from the Olympian squabbles. While other gods might get into rivalries over who had the biggest temple in a city, or whose festival was more popular, Hestia's worship was decentralized, spread across countless individual homes. There was no single, grand Hestia temple to fight over, no major festival whose popularity could be a source of divine jealousy. Her devotees weren't gathered in massive, easily mobilized groups that could become pawns in divine political games. They were families, quietly honoring her around their own fires. It's hard to incite a cosmic rivalry based on who makes the best burned offerings of bread crusts. Her worship was about maintaining harmony and continuity within a defined space, the antithesis of the disruptive conflicts that fueled so many other divine narratives. While Ares thrived on the chaos of the battlefield, and Poseidon expressed his power through the wildness of the sea, Hestia's power was felt in the quiet peace of a secure home. The rituals honoring her reinforced this sense of peace and stability. They were grounding, repetitive, and focused on the simple necessities of life. You weren't praying for victory in battle or a dramatic intervention in your love life. You were praying for the fire to stay lit, for the food to be cooked, for your family to be safe within the walls. The simplicity and domesticity of Hestia's worship were not a sign of her being unimportant. They were a testament to her fundamental, pervasive importance. She was the goddess of the essential, the quiet anchor in a world that could be unpredictable and dangerous. And the ways the Greeks honored her reflected this, not with thunderous applause or dramatic displays, but with quiet reverence, daily acknowledgement, and the simple, enduring warmth of a flame. This grounding, peaceful form of worship mirrored her own nature and domain, ensuring that her presence remained tied to stability and continuity, far removed from the dramatic, conflict-driven interactions of her fellow Olympians. It's almost like she realized that true power wasn't in being the loudest voice in the room, but in being the quiet warmth that everyone relied on to survive. Smart goddess. So, you've seen how Hestia's domain was the quiet, vital heart of the home, centered around the hearth, and how the ways Greeks honored her were simple, personal, and domestic. You've seen how she deliberately stepped away from the potential relationship dramas by taking her vow of eternal virginity, and how she even yielded her seat on the Olympian council, opting out of the political squabbles. All these factors point towards a goddess whose very essence is peace, stability, and the internal world. And this, perhaps more than anything else, explains why, when you dive into the vast ocean of Greek mythology, you find surprisingly few dramatic myths centered around Hestia herself. Think about the stories that define the other major Olympians. They are packed with action, conflict, passion, and high stakes. Zeus is constantly involved in power struggles, seductions, and punishing those who defy him or threaten his rule. Hera is a central figure in countless myths through her relentless pursuit of Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children, causing immense suffering and driving heroic quests. Poseidon is stirring up storms, causing earthquakes, competing for patronage of cities. Remember his showdown with Athena over Athens? Mainstream historical fact: the contest between Athena and Poseidon for Athens, where she offered the olive tree and he offered a saltwater spring, is a famous founding myth of the city. Ares is literally the god of war, his myths are battles. Athena, while wise, is deeply involved in warfare and often intervenes in human conflicts. Aphrodite's myths are rife with tales of desire, jealousy, and the chaos that love can wreak. Even the younger gods like Apollo and Artemis have dramatic stories involving monsters, tragic loves, divine punishments, and contests. Their domains are inherently external and involve interaction, often conflict, with the world and with each other. Hestia's domain, however, is the hearth, the home, domesticity, peace. These are not concepts that lend themselves easily to epic battles, dramatic chases, or tragic love affairs on a grand scale. What kind of conflict arises from ensuring the fire stays lit? What dramatic tension is there in making sure the family is safe and warm? Her realm is one of stability, not upheaval, of continuity, not change, of quiet presence, not dramatic intervention. The stories of the hearth are the small, personal stories of daily life, of families gathering, of meals shared, of children being welcomed. These are profoundly important narratives for the people living them, but they don't have the same narrative punch as a hero battling a hydra or a goddess turning a mortal into a spider because she won a weaving contest. Her power is not destructive or disruptive, it is nurturing and preservative. While her siblings might tear down cities, sink ships, or drive mortals to madness with desire, Hestia's power is in keeping things together, maintaining order within a defined space. It's hard to build a dramatic myth around someone who is primarily focused on domestic harmony. The Adventures of Hestia, and the Perpetually Warm Soup, probably wasn't topping the ancient Greek bestseller lists. This inherent peacefulness of her domain is the primary reason she doesn't feature prominently in the dramatic squabbles that define the myths of her siblings. She wasn't competing for territory. Her domain was everywhere, yet nowhere in particular. She wasn't involved in relationships that sparked jealousy and rivalry, and her power wasn't exerted through external conflict. She simply didn't participate in the kinds of activities that generated the dramatic narratives we associate with other gods. She was the divine embodiment of the quiet eye of the storm, the calm center that remained stable while the world, and Olympus, raged around her. A quirky tidbit here: while major deities like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena have countless myths detailing their exploits and interactions, Hestia appears in relatively few narratives. Her mentions are often brief, acknowledging her presence, her status, or her role in receiving offerings, rather than detailing specific actions or conflicts. This lack of narrative focus isn't necessarily a sign of unimportance, but rather a reflection of her non-dramatic nature. It's like she's the essential supporting character who holds the whole story together, but doesn't get her own action sequences. You don't tell the story of the foundation of the house, you tell the story of the people living in it, and the adventures they have because they have a stable home base. Historians still argue whether the scarcity of dramatic myths about Hestia is proof that her worship was more ancient and less anthropomorphic than the Olympian cults, and thus didn't lend itself to narrative storytelling in the same way, or if it simply reflects a bias in the surviving texts, which may have favored tales of external power, conflict, and human-divine interaction over the quiet sanctity of the domestic sphere. This scholarly debate highlights how unusual her lack of dramatic myths is. It's something noticed and pondered even by those who study these stories professionally. Her lack of involvement in squabbles isn't a plot hole. It's a feature of her character and domain. She wasn't dragged into conflicts because her sphere of influence didn't naturally intersect with the arenas where those conflicts occurred. She wasn't competing for power over nations, control of natural forces, or the affections of divine or mortal beings. Her competition, if you could even call it that, was with things like cold and hunger, threats to the safety and warmth of the home. Essential challenges, yes, but not the stuff of divine duels or cosmic wars. Imagine trying to write an epic poem about a goddess whose main concern is ensuring the fire doesn't go out. The climax might be a sudden gust of wind threatening the flame, heroically thwarted by Hestia summoning a divine fireguard. It just doesn't have the same ring as Zeus hurling a lightning bolt or Poseidon summoning a kraken. Her victories were quiet victories. Another meal safely cooked, another night spent in warmth and security, another family gathered together around the fire. These were the triumphs of Hestia, essential and profound for human well-being, but lacking the external drama that fueled the myths of her siblings. This difference in the kind of power she wielded, focused inward on stability and nurturing rather than outward on control and conflict, meant that the narrative possibilities for her were different. Her stories are less about what she did to others or what others did to her in dramatic fashion, and more about her presence and her role. She is the quiet anchor, the unseen force that makes other stories possible by providing the foundation of home and community. You wouldn't have heroes setting off on quests if they didn't have a home to return to, or, tragically, lament losing. Hestia is the goddess of that fundamental need for home, and her lack of squabbles and myths is a direct consequence of her embodying peace and stability in a pantheon defined by dramatic, external conflict. She wasn't avoiding the squabbles. Her very nature and domain existed outside the realm where those squabbles occurred. She was too busy keeping the home fires burning to get involved in who stole whose golden apple this week. She was too busy keeping the home fires burning to get involved in who stole whose golden apple this week. And that fundamental difference, that focus on the quiet, internal peace of the hearth rather than the loud, external chaos of the world, is perhaps best understood by directly contrasting her realm with the domains of some of her more, shall we say, energetic siblings. Let's look at Ares, for example, the god of war. You couldn't find two deities more diametrically opposed in their essence. Ares's domain is war, specifically the brutal, chaotic, bloody, and often senseless aspects of it. He embodies the fury of battle, the clash of arms, the shedding of blood, the raw violence of conflict. His presence is felt on the battlefield, in the cries of the wounded, the dust kicked up by charging armies, the sheer, visceral terror and excitement of combat. His power is destructive, disruptive, and thrives on antagonism. His myths are, unsurprisingly, filled with conflict. He's either starting wars, participating in them with violent enthusiasm, getting into fights with other gods, like Athena, who often defeats him through strategy rather than brute force, or being thwarted by heroes. His domain is inherently external, public, and defined by its destructive interaction with the world. You don't pray to Ares for peace, you pray for victory through violence, or perhaps just to survive his terrible energy. His power is measured in casualties and conquests. Now, place that image alongside Hestia and her hearth. Hestia's domain is the home, the hearth fire, domesticity, family, peace, and stability. Her presence is felt in the warmth of the fire, the smell of cooking food, the quiet murmur of conversation, the safety of walls against the outside world. Her power is nurturing, preservative, and thrives on harmony. Her myths are, as we've seen, remarkably free of conflict. She doesn't start wars, she represents the very thing that war destroys: the home, the family, the peace within. Her domain is inherently internal, private, and defined by its stable, unchanging presence. You don't pray to Hestia for victory in battle. You pray for your family to be safe while the battle rages outside, or for a warm place to return to when it's over. Her power is measured in continuity and comfort. The contrast couldn't be starker. Ares embodies the tearing apart, the destruction, the external clash. Hestia embodies the holding together, the building up, the internal peace. It's the difference between a cosmic wrecking ball and a cosmic foundation stone. One thrives on disruption, the other on stability. One is loud and violent, the other is quiet and constant. It's simply impossible for a goddess whose essence is the peaceful hearth to get involved in the kind of squabbles that define the god of war. Their natures are fundamentally incompatible. Ares seeks conflict. Hestia seeks peace. You can't have a dramatic fight over who gets to be the most stable. Oh yeah? Well, my hearth is more consistently warm than yours. Is not. See? Doesn't work. Let's consider Athena, another major Olympian whose domain involves conflict, though in a different way than Ares. Athena is the goddess of strategic warfare, wisdom, crafts, and cities. She's often depicted in armor, a fierce protector of cities and heroes. While she's also associated with crafts and wisdom, a significant part of her mythology involves conflict, advising heroes in battle, participating in divine wars, like the Gigantomachy, and defending her favored cities. Her contest with Poseidon over the patronage of Athens, where she offered the olive tree and he offered a saltwater spring, resulting in a dramatic divine judgment, mainstream historical fact. The myth of Athena and Poseidon's contest for Athens is a foundational story explaining the city's name and its connection to the olive tree, is a prime example of her involvement in external, territorial, and competitive divine interactions. Her power is intellectual and strategic, but it is often applied to external challenges, including conflict. Contrast Athena's strategic interventions and citywide contests with Hestia's focus on the individual home and family. Athena's power shapes the fate of cities and armies. Hestia's power shapes the well-being of the people within those cities and families. Athena is concerned with the external structures of society and defense. Hestia is concerned with the internal core of that society, the home. While Athena might be strategizing how to win a siege, Hestia is ensuring the families inside the besieged city have a place of safety and warmth to huddle in. Their domains intersect in that Athena protects the external shell, the city, while Hestia protects the internal heart, the home, but their methods and priorities are vastly different. Athena's domain naturally leads to myths about battles, political maneuvering, and contests of skill or patronage. Hestia's domain, again, leads back to the quiet rituals of daily life. You don't have a divine contest over who can best keep the dust bunnies away from the hearth. My hearth is spotless. Oh yeah? Prove it. Let's have a divine dusting contest. Riveting stuff. The very nature of their power dictates the narratives they inhabit. Ares's power is expressed through destruction and conflict, so his stories are about fighting. Athena's power involves strategy, protection, and competition on a larger scale, so her stories involve battles, city foundations, and contests. Hestia's power is expressed through stability, warmth, and presence within the home, so her stories are about, well, mostly about being there and receiving offerings. It's like the difference between a Michael Bay action movie, Ares, a historical epic with political intrigue and battle scenes, Athena, and a quiet, slice-of-life documentary about the importance of family and home, Hestia. They're all narratives, but they operate on entirely different levels of dramatic intensity. A quirky tidbit that further highlights this contrast. While Ares was largely disliked by both gods and mortals, even Zeus calls him the most hateful god, seen as volatile and dangerous, Hestia was universally revered and loved. Her gentle, constant nature and essential domain made her approachable and non-threatening. Nobody wanted Ares showing up at their housewarming party, but everyone wanted Hestia there. It's hard to get into a squabble with someone everyone adores because they keep your house warm and safe. Historians still argue whether the prominence of conflict-driven narratives in Greek mythology reflects a society constantly engaged in warfare and political struggle, projecting their anxieties and experiences onto the divine, or if the myths themselves helped shape Greek attitudes towards these things. This scholarly debate underscores how deeply intertwined the domains of gods like Ares and Athena were with the external realities of ancient Greek life, realities that Hestia, through her domain, offered a sanctuary from. Her peaceful domain was not just a personal preference, it was a fundamental aspect of her divine identity that prevented her from engaging in the types of conflicts that defined her siblings. She wasn't built for external squabbles because her power and purpose were entirely focused on the internal, the stable, the nurturing core of existence. While Ares was out there sharpening his spear and Athena was drawing up battle plans, Hestia was tending the fire, ensuring that even in a world full of war and conflict, there was still a place of peace and safety to be found. She didn't need to compete for power in the external world because her power was the indispensable foundation of the internal world, a foundation that couldn't be shaken by the loudest divine arguments or the most brutal celestial battles. Her peace wasn't a lack of power, it was the quiet, enduring strength that made all other life, and all other stories, possible. She was too busy keeping the home fires burning to get involved in who stole whose golden apple this week. And that fundamental difference, that focus on the quiet, internal peace of the hearth rather than the loud, external chaos of the world, is perhaps best understood by directly contrasting her realm with the domains of some of her more, shall we say, energetic siblings. Let's look at Ares, for example, the god of war. You couldn't find two deities more diametrically opposed in their essence. Ares's domain is war, specifically the brutal, chaotic, bloody, and often senseless aspects of it. He embodies the fury of battle, the clash of arms, the shedding of blood, the raw violence of conflict. His presence is felt on the battlefield, in the cries of the wounded, the dust kicked up by charging armies, the sheer, visceral terror and excitement of combat. His power is destructive, disruptive, and thrives on antagonism. His myths are, unsurprisingly, filled with conflict. He's either starting wars, participating in them with violent enthusiasm, getting into fights with other gods, like Athena, who often defeats him through strategy rather than brute force, or being thwarted by heroes. His domain is inherently external, public, and defined by its destructive interaction with the world. You don't pray to Ares for peace, you pray for victory through violence, or perhaps just to survive his terrible energy. His power is measured in casualties and conquests. Now, place that image alongside Hestia and her hearth. Hestia's domain is the home, the hearth fire, domesticity, family, peace, and stability. Her presence is felt in the warmth of the fire, the smell of cooking food, the quiet murmur of conversation, the safety of walls against the outside world. Her power is nurturing, preservative, and thrives on harmony. Her myths are, as we've seen, remarkably free of conflict. She doesn't start wars, she represents the very thing that war destroys: the home, the family, the peace within. Her domain is inherently internal, private, and defined by its stable, unchanging presence. You don't pray to Hestia for victory in battle, you pray for your family to be safe while the battle rages outside, or for a warm place to return to when it's over. Her power is measured in continuity and comfort. The contrast couldn't be starker. Ares embodies the tearing apart, the destruction, the external clash. Hestia embodies the holding together, the building up, the internal peace. It's the difference between a cosmic wrecking ball and a cosmic foundation stone. One thrives on disruption, the other on stability. One is loud and violent, the other is quiet and constant. It's simply impossible for a goddess whose essence is the peaceful hearth to get involved in the kind of squabbles that define the god of war. Their natures are fundamentally incompatible. Ares seeks conflict, Hestia seeks peace. You can't have a dramatic fight over who gets to be the most stable. Oh yeah? Well, my hearth is more consistently warm than yours. Is not. See? Doesn't work. Let's consider Athena, another major Olympian whose domain involves conflict, though in a different way than Ares. Athena is the goddess of strategic warfare, wisdom, crafts, and cities. She's often depicted in armor, a fierce protector of cities and heroes. While she's also associated with crafts and wisdom, a significant part of her mythology involves conflict, advising heroes in battle, participating in divine wars, like the Gigantomachy, and defending her favored cities. Her contest with Poseidon over the patronage of Athens, where she offered the olive tree and he offered a saltwater spring, resulting in a dramatic divine judgment, mainstream historical fact. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for Athens, where she offered the olive tree and he offered a saltwater spring, is a famous founding myth of the city, is a prime example of her involvement in external, territorial, and competitive divine interactions. Her power is intellectual and strategic, but it is often applied to external challenges, including conflict. Contrast Athena's strategic interventions and citywide contests with Hestia's focus on the individual home and family. Athena's power shapes the fate of cities and armies. Hestia's power shapes the well-being of the people within those cities and families. Athena is concerned with the external structures of society and defense. Hestia is concerned with the internal core of that society, the home. While Athena might be strategizing how to win a siege, Hestia is ensuring the families inside the besieged city have a place of safety and warmth to huddle in. Their domains intersect in that Athena protects the external shell, the city, while Hestia protects the internal heart, the home, but their methods and priorities are vastly different. Athena's domain naturally leads to myths about battles, political maneuvering, and contests of skill or patronage. Hestia's domain, again, leads back to the quiet rituals of daily life. You don't have a divine contest over who can best keep the dust bunnies away from the hearth. My hearth is spotless. Oh yeah? Prove it. Let's have a divine dusting contest. Riveting stuff. The very nature of their power dictates the narratives they inhabit. Ares's power is expressed through destruction and conflict, so his stories are about fighting. Athena's power involves strategy, protection, and competition on a larger scale, so her stories involve battles, city foundations, and contests. Hestia's power is expressed through stability, warmth, and presence within the home, so her stories are about, well, mostly about being there and receiving offerings. It's like the difference between a Michael Bay action movie, Ares, a historical epic with political intrigue and battle scenes, Athena, and a quiet, slice-of-life documentary about the importance of family and home, Hestia. They're all narratives, but they operate on entirely different levels of dramatic intensity. A quirky tidbit that further highlights this contrast. While Ares was largely disliked by both gods and mortals, even Zeus calls him the most hateful god, seen as volatile and dangerous, Hestia was universally revered and loved. Her gentle, constant nature and essential domain made her approachable and non-threatening. Nobody wanted Ares showing up at their housewarming party, but everyone wanted Hestia there. It's hard to get into a squabble with someone everyone adores because they keep your house warm and safe. Historians still argue whether the prominence of conflict-driven narratives in Greek mythology reflects a society constantly engaged in warfare and political struggle, projecting their anxieties and experiences onto the divine, or if the myths themselves helped shape Greek attitudes towards these things. This scholarly debate underscores how deeply intertwined the domains of gods like Ares and Athena were with the external realities of ancient Greek life, realities that Hestia, through her domain, offered a sanctuary from. Her peaceful domain was not just a personal preference, it was a fundamental aspect of her divine identity that prevented her from engaging in the types of conflicts that defined her siblings. She wasn't built for external squabbles because her power and purpose were entirely focused on the internal, the stable, the nurturing core of existence. While Ares was out there sharpening his spear and Athena was drawing up battle plans, Hestia was tending the fire, ensuring that even in a world full of war and conflict, there was still a place of peace and safety to be found. She didn't need to compete for power in the external world because her power was the indispensable foundation of the internal world, a foundation that couldn't be shaken by the loudest divine arguments or the most brutal celestial battles. Her peace wasn't a lack of power, it was the quiet, enduring strength that made all other life, and all other stories possible. And so, as we reach the quiet conclusion of our journey with Hestia, what are we left with? Not tales of thunderous battles or dramatic divine interventions, but the enduring image of a steady flame, a warm hearth, and a quiet presence. Hestia's legacy isn't etched in stone on massive temples or shouted in the choruses of epic poems. It's woven into the fabric of daily life, in the simple act of gathering around a fire, sharing a meal, finding comfort and safety within the walls of home. Her power wasn't about conquering the external world, but about creating and preserving the essential internal one. She showed that true strength can be quiet, that peace isn't just the absence of conflict, but a powerful, active presence in itself. She is the goddess who opted out of the drama, not because she was weak or irrelevant, but because she understood that her domain, the quiet heart of home and community, was the most vital realm of all. While her siblings vied for control of the cosmos, Hestia quietly ensured there was a universe worth coming home to. As the fire crackles low now, casting dancing shadows across the room, feel the warmth, the stillness, the sense of being grounded. This quiet comfort, this feeling of safety and belonging, this is Hestia's enduring legacy. It's a reminder that amidst the noise and chaos of the world, there is immense power in peace, in stability, in the simple act of creating a safe, warm space. It's the quiet strength of the hearth, a strength that needs no squabbles, no drama, no thunderous pronouncements to be felt. It simply is, a constant, comforting presence, just like Hestia herself. As the embers glow softly, and the night deepens around you, let the warmth of the hearth settle in your heart. Drift now into the quiet peace she embodies.